Hello, this is Ashley Pettit, and I'm here to give you guys my book review video on my book, which was Grown Up Digital by Dan Tapscott. And in this presentation, I'm going to give you a summary, the application to college setting, and then obviously the credibility of the book, such as the research in the author and what I personally think, and just kind of compare that to outside research, but also detail the recommended audience and then give you a biblical view of the content on the book. So hopefully you guys can understand what this book is about and how you can apply it to your lives outside of this class. For starters, the summary is all about our generation and the net generation characteristics, but this is also a book that compares the previous generations to us now and how that affects the way we work, the way we think, the way we talk, the way we communicate, like pretty much anything you can think of, it affects it. But this book is also a field guide for previous generations, such as the baby boomers and the Generation X, to interact and relate to us. And it also identifies our recommended audience for the book because there are helpful tips at the end of each section, which were really insightful into how someone reading this book, whatever generation they were in, could take away from it. And they could see that there's something in this book that can help them, whether it is to relate to us or to understand us if, say, I'm reading it or you guys were to read it. But for starters, just going back to the net gen characteristics, this book identifies that we are different and we're very different and technology savvy, as far as you guys could probably understand that. But this book, it says that there's a natural affinity for technology and it's uncanny. And what we do is this book is explaining that we turn to the internet to communicate, understand, learn, find, and do many things. And growing up digital, it has an impact on the way we think as a generation, and it changes the way our brains are wired. But more in our characteristics is we're more tolerant of racial diversity and are smarter, quicker, and much more adaptive than our previous generations, such as our parents or anybody else that could impact us that are older. But we grew up with technology so much that it's like air to us. We don't think twice about it. We don't think twice about how to use a computer or how to use an iPhone. And in this book, the author and his son have this moment where the son is looking on the computer and he's looking at Mars, and the son is just amazed, and the dad is just amazed more because the computer can do that, but the son is just completely amazed by Mars. And it shows you that we are more thinking on the impact and the outer and the external thing rather than, oh, how does this machine work? But pretty much the author is just explaining that we don't take what we're given. We love to see more. We want to see what else is happening, and like we're not going to believe everything that's told to us because we know that we can look it up on our own. And we have this natural ability in us that we want to be collaborators, we want to be organizers, we want to read, we want to write, and we have these strategies, and it's just taking control of the critical elements of our communication revolution. And on page 20 of this book, I mean, first 20 pages, he's already hitting hard on this, and it explains more of like how we are as a generation and what that means when we're learners, that means when we are talkers and communicators and workers. And it just is a huge summary of that, and it shows how there's a difference between the generations in the past and the generations now. And it does, like I said, it's a field guide for the baby boomers because of these helpful tips at the end, which I'll get into. But it's just a straight up book about how our technology that's engraved in us impacts everything that we do. As mentioned, I was going to give you an application to the college setting as far as the summary, like I just did, and we'll get into more later. But pretty much the summary and the application to the college setting are very similar because you're going to take what you learn from this generation and apply it to how we're going to act as higher education professionals. And as we're going to start dealing with people that are younger than us and in a way that we have to lead them, it's very important that we understand them. But for that, some details that you need to keep in mind is that this generation, like, we question everything we're given. And that means that classes are set up differently. It's no more just straight lecture, as you guys have seen in your college career app, where professors switch it up and they might do group work or they might do research projects more or something like that. But the information given to them must be sound. It's less opinion. It's more, I want to see your facts. I want to see your research. I want to know how you got that information. And yes, some could say that we are a very critical generation, but in the sense, this author on page 21 kind of explains how this has already impacted education as we know it, and we are seeing that now based on how you could look at your own classes at Grace College even. But also, our world is smaller, and since that's true, career options must be open to everywhere in the world. Now, I understand that some of you aren't going to be in the career options field, but you are always going to have an impact on someone, and whether that be to push a student to a career that they would enjoy and love and match well with, and if that happens to be in international relations overseas, like that's awesome, but we need to keep in mind that our world is so much smaller because of that, and we need to be aware that career options have to be just as familiar with that. But also, our student roles and teacher roles are changing. So we can encourage students to teach as well as learn. And in my classes, specifically at Grace College, there have been plenty of opportunities for me to teach the class. And that gives us the ownership of our own knowledge, but also it shows the students how to find their own information and how to kind of become the teacher of themselves. And so as you guys are higher education professionals anywhere in the world or any profession, whatever title you may have, you can always encourage students to teach as well as learn when they're going through their college careers. Also, we need to remember that our media, their media, like same generation here, but our media usage is huge. And our brains are developing from a rich media environment. So because of that, we can apply that to a college setting. We need to provide multiple outlets of information for them. We need to not rely on a school paper only for their benefit, whether it be a Twitter account or a website, a magazine. We need to be able and aware of how they're receiving information so that we can give it to them in a way and in a medium that they will understand and use. And these are just a few applications of the college setting. I just took it more as the different fields that we may take, how can you use this book for that? And these are just a few ways. Just make sure you're aware of how they learn and who they are as a generation, but also remember that media usage is very big for them. Technology is huge. You have to keep it up with them or they're just going to get bored. But just keep that in mind as you guys go into higher education because it's a different world and people are changing, and this is something you guys just need to keep in mind. For the credibility of this book, I looked at a few pieces of the literature and compared it to outside sources. So for starters, this author kind of explains how the net generation is coddled, but he doesn't focus on that. He focuses on the positive things and how we can interact the two. But regardless, student affairs professionals also said that we were coddled, and they said that we were protected and used to being given handouts. And this is in Levine and Dean 2012, which we've already went over in this class, but I just saw the connection, so I thought that this credibility was there for the research, but also with a connection to an outside source, the implication was that net generation characteristics are important for education. And as I just explained to you how it applies to an educational setting, this is also something that came up in an article by Yoon-Jun Oh and Thomas C. Reeves, and they said in their article that the net gen characteristics are important for educational training, and it will impact and shape how training goes as far as the future and what that looks like for this generation. So hopefully that shows you that this book is credible and the author has credibility with himself in this novel. As I read this novel, like I told you, there are little tips at the end of each section, and this is actually where I got the recommended audience from. So the tips include tips for educators, managers, marketing professionals, parents, government leaders, and leadership over our generation. So that's the author's intention for recommended audience, but I also believe that net generation students could read this book, and it could be a good audience and a good book for them to read because it helps kind of explain why they view certain things one way, or it just gives them a better insight into their own generation. So that's my personal opinion on who the recommended audience for this book would be. For the biblical perspective of the book, I chose to connect a verse from Psalm 78:8, and as it says, they're talking about the rebellious generation of their ancestors and the past of the people he's telling the story to in Psalm. And as you can see, it says, they will not be like the rebellious generation of their ancestors, a rebellious generation whose heart was not steadfast and whose spirits were unfaithful to God. And I chose this verse to connect with the book because the book is all about how generations can be different and how we can celebrate the differences and learn from them. And this is what's happening in Psalm. They're talking about the rebellious generation and of their ancestors and how they shouldn't be like that now. And I just can see the connection between the two. And I hope you guys can see that as well. But overall, this is my presentation. So I hope you guys have learned a lot about the book Grown Up Digital. And you can have a few takeaways from this presentation. Thank you for listening.